He walked up to the giant statue of Russ. It was, he had to admit, a good likeness. The ruthless energy of his gene brother had been perfectly captured. As Magnus approached it, he grew in stature. By the time he drew up to the image, his head was at the same height. They stood facing each other, just as they had on Prospero. Magnus looked into the unseeing eyes of his old enemy and smiled. "Do you remember what you said to me, brother?" Magnus spoke aloud, his voice pure and powerful. His fingers twitched at his sides, eager for what was to come. "Do you remember what you said to me as we fought before the pyramid of Photep? Do you remember the words you used? I do. As I recall, your face was tortured. Imagine that, the master of wolves, his ferocity twisted into grief. And yet, you still carried out your duty. You always did what was asked of you. So loyal, so tenacious. Truly, you were the attack dog of the Emperor." Magnus lost his smile. "You took no pleasure in what you did. I knew that then, and I know it now. But all things change, my brother. I'm not the same as I was, and you're... Well, let us not mention where you are now." In storytelling, there are two types of characters: those who react and those who act. These archetypes are relatively straightforward. The reactors are the ones who follow the story. Yes, they can make decisions, however that is only within the confines of what the story dictates. The actors are the ones who drive the story forward. The story doesn't happen to them, they happen to the story. And none in 40k fit the role of the actors as well as the Primarchs. And Games Workshop knows this all too well, not just in the context of 40k's story, but also in their real-life sales. The plot of 40k was always just kind of there. Things happened, but nothing ever really moved the story forward. Even the events such as the fall of Cadia didn't really seem to have much follow-through. Except when we consider the return of Guilliman. Since then, Games Workshop have been trying to move the story forward at a much faster pace, introducing things like the Primaris and the return of another Primarch, the Lion. And now recently we have the upcoming return of Fulgrim and possibly Alfarius. Things are moving quickly in 40k. And now with the release of the new Space Wolves models, which look insane by the way, Logan Grimnar especially, history is repeating itself. And I believe that the return of Leman Russ is going to be announced very soon. But I don't think he's going to be returning alone. In this video, I'm going to present the evidence of the return of not just one, but two Loyalist Primarchs, Leman Russ and Russ Corax. So, without further ado, let us begin. The last we heard from Leman Russ was some 200 years after the Emperor became entombed on his throne. He simply got up at a feast, said he needed to leave, took some of his guard with him, and was gone. Something about finding the Tree of Life. Since then, the Space Wolves have gone on great hunts to find him again, seemingly after receiving visions from Russ himself. Notably, during the Horus Heresy, Russ took on 4 challengers from a strange warp entity that took on the appearance of a more civilized Leman Russ had he not landed on Ferrus after his birth. This alternate Russ revealed to him the purpose of the Spear of Russ, which held a portion of the Emperor's power. This spear would reveal the truth to anyone who had been cut by it. Russ was then pierced by this spear and learned the true nature of the Primarchs, something that led him to despair and of which he would never be able to forget. This truth likely being what he entered the Eye of Terror for. Corax was consumed by the need for revenge after the destruction of his legion. having tried to rebuild, only having the gene seed used to rebuild corrupted by the Alpha Legion, causing his new sons to mutate, which resulted in him killing them off one by one, bringing them the peace and the release from their torment. Corax would then charge into the Eye of Terror, looking to kill Lorgar, and apparently turn into some kind of warp raven demon thing. He hasn't been seen since. He learned of Russ's disappearance on his great quest to find the seeds of the Tree of Life, which would cure the Emperor. He learned the long and honourable history of the Space Wolves unto the present age. More and more knowledge poured into his willing brain, and he soaked it up like a sponge. Russ has been stated to have gone into the Eye of Terror in search of the Tree of Life. This is specifically mentioned in the book Space Wolf by William King back in 1999. This happens when Ragnar Blackmane is being inseminated with the knowledge of the Legion during his trials, and that's about it. We never really hear about it again, so we have to pull from some other sources. Now, there is actually one more time it is mentioned in the lore, kind of, in the Arcs of Omen tarot cards. This card shows a young warrior, sword in hand, kneeling before the Tree of Life. What this means is anyone's guess. Because this card comes from the Farsight book, many think that it is a depiction of Farsight himself. This figure, however, is most definitely human. Now, of course, the tarot connect to anything, and they are human creation, so it wouldn't really have a Xenos as the focus. But with all this in mind, we are absolutely aware that there is another character that has a connection to the Tree of Life, Leman Russ. His appearance being as a young boy also gives credit to the idea that when Russ returns, he will be as an Odin sort of figure, much older and wiser, not unlike the Lion's Return. Russ is often considered volatile and reckless, yet he himself claims he puts on this act in order to appear how he is expected. And so that is how he appears on the card during this journey to find the Tree of Life, young and rash. And though to him at the time this is what he believes is best, after 10,000 years perhaps he is ready to show his true self, the wise and contemplative leader he was always meant to be. Famously known as the Emperor's executioner and dog, going wherever he is told to. Now, without his father around, it is time he captained his own ship. The light to the right of the tree certainly screams Astronomicon to me, which would connect to the idea that the seeds from the Tree of Life could heal the Emperor. On the left we have the hero, in search of his prize. In the centre, the tree that is his prize. And in the distance to the right, the journey's end, the light of his father. I do actually have other thoughts on what exactly the light represents, but that will come in the next part.
The Tree of Life. But hope blooms in the garden of lost souls and burning stars.
But hope blooms in the garden of lost souls and burning stars. The Garden of Lost Souls could very well be the Garden of Nurgle, the burning stars being the warp. It's subtle, but the crawling skeleton reaching out for the Tree of Life in the lower left corner could be a representation of the death and decay that is Nurgle. In Eldar legends, there is an Eldari god named Isha, the Mother. She was the god of nature, fertility and rejuvenation. After the birth of Slaanesh, she was captured by the new Chaos God, and in Isha's attempts to call out for help, she was answered by Nurgle, who would take Isha from Slaanesh and imprison her in his Garden of Decay, forever testing his plagues and diseases on her as a permanent test subject. Isha is said to be able to cure any ailment, and so does not succumb to this torture, forever trapped in a loop of suffering. There are many who believe that this tree of life is actually a representation of Isha. If this is true, then the human Eldar alliance that saw the return of Guilliman could now be seeing the return of one of the Eldar gods at the hands of humanity, and possibly a genuine way to resurrect the Emperor himself. Okay, back to the shining light to the right of the tarot card. What if this light is Guilliman? In Godblight, Guilliman is on the verge of death after fighting his traitor brother Mortarion. Mortarion brings the dying Guilliman to the Garden of Nurgle, and in that moment the Emperor empowers Rabuse, bringing him back from the brink of death and releasing a fire so powerful it turns everything around him to glass, and forces Nurgle to flee or hide in his little Shrek hut. That's right, a Chaos God within his own personal realm hides from the might of the Emperor. Chaos Gods aren't just a single entity that exists and creates its demons and realm. Those demons, that garden, are all a part of Nurgle himself, extensions of himself, much in the same way that my arm is just an extension of myself. In this moment, Nurgle, the Great Father, is in pain, scared, distracted. What if the light in the tarot card represents the moment the Emperor infuses his power with Guilliman, wounding Nurgle in that moment that Russ was in place to rescue Isha? A perfectly coincidental distraction. Or, as many would like to think, due to the Emperor's greatest strength, his ability to predict the future, he knew exactly when to act, being well aware what is happening with all of his sons. The Emperor's powers have clearly gotten to a point where he can harm a Chaos God, even while not personally present. If he can infuse Guilliman with his powers, who is to say he isn't also aware of what Leman Russ is up to? Okay, so how did Russ get there? For the last 10,000 years, Leman Russ has been missing from the galaxy, that time likely spent within the Eye of Terror. So, what took him so long? Well, for a start, things were never going to be that easy within the Eye of Terror, and not only would Russ be searching for the Tree of Life, but chances are he was trying to figure out what he is after his revelation from the Spear of Russ. The next thing to realise is that time within the warp moves differently. Those who enter it can re-emerge and find that thousands of years have passed. This is how we have characters like Talos from the Night Lords trilogy, who was there from near the beginning of the Great Crusade, and was still then around during the 40th millennium. For all Russ knows, he could have only been within the Eye of Terror for a few minutes to a few days, though it is probably much longer. We then have the information from the Space Wolves Codex 7th edition, that what is believed to be Leman Russ's armour was found on the second Great Hunt in the Temple of Horus. And then, during the Battle of the Fang by Chris Raitt, both a Thousand Sun Sorcerer and Magnus himself mention on separate occasions that they are aware of where Russ is. It's vague, very vague even, but still something. And it's not like they were trying to manipulate anyone here. The Thousand Sun Sorcerer is talking to another Thousand Sun, and Magnus, well, Magnus is talking to himself. This is purely exposition for the reader. So Leman Russ could very well be imprisoned in the Eye of Terror somewhere, possibly at the hands of Magnus. It would explain why what was possibly his armour was found in the Temple of Horus. Though, I do have another thought on that. Last we heard of Russ and Corax was that he was embracing his warp soul aspect of himself and forced Lorgar to hide within his own tower in the Eye of Terror. A lot of people believe that Corvus has taken on some kind of demon raven form, and there are equally a lot of people that say that is not the case. I like the demon raven thing, and it fits quite nicely with what I'm about to say. What if Russ has developed some kind of demon wolf form, much like the Wolfen? The Wolfen are a curse, but did the Emperor really make that mistake when designing the Space Wolves gene seed? Rather than a curse, it could just be a manifestation of Leman Russ's true potential. Russ may not have had his armor taken from him, but discarded it himself altogether once it can no longer contain his form. Now, speaking of Corvus, I have no evidence to back up this next part, but considering how Corvus and Russ are both wandering around the Eye of Terror, it would be interesting to think that maybe their journey has caused them to cross paths in some way. Sure, the odds are low, but it is a story after all, and stranger things have happened. What if together they were able to find their way to the Tree of Life / Isha in the Garden of Nurgle? Use the moment of opportunity created by Guilliman during his battle with Mortarion, freeing Isha, and the three of them escape the Eye of Terror together. And that is the reveal. Leman Russ, Corvus Corax, Isha, and Eldar God all are reintroduced to the setting, balancing the scales between the Imperium and Chaos. Guilliman, the Lion, Russ, and Corvus for the Loyalists. Magnus, Angron, Fulgrim, and Mortarion for the traitors, with a possible Alfaria / Omegon dropping in. Whoever side each of them is on is really beyond me. And then with the bonus of an Eldar God to help the Eldari get a boost, because let's be honest, they need it. We all expect another Primarch to return sometime soon, but 2 at once? That's a curveball Games Workshop I'm sure would love to throw at us. 2 model releases, twice the profit, especially while the 40k IP is at its peak with the Amazon show and Henry Cavill in the spotlight right now. Honestly, I hope you guys can appreciate the mental gymnastics I had to do to pull all of this out of my arse. Now, if all of this does somehow end up happening, does this mean that we should be preparing for the possible return of the Emperor in the next handful of years? Maybe. Warhammer is currently at its most relevant right now, and that won't last forever. Games Workshop knows this. Even the once giants like Marvel and Star Wars are starting to lose their impact. I think Games Workshop is preparing to strike while the iron is hot. Will this be good for 40k? Briefly, yes. But in the long run? Who knows? They have more to gain right now than they do to lose. And in the long run, when the spark is out, it will be the fans who have grown up on it and been with it from the beginning who are going to be sticking around to see this story through. Anyway, that's enough for today. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, share and comment, and do all those other things you know that will help this channel grow.
Let's feed the algorithm gods.
Thanks again for watching, and ta for now.